Okay, so let's continue with the second part here. As we were just saying before, we we were just looking at the effect of an income change. And when incomes increase, the budget line will pivot, not pivot, it will shift outwards in a parallel manner, indicating that the ratio of prices didn't change. But if incomes were to fall, let's say go back from 40 to 30, then it will shift downwards to the right. Notice that when it shifts, sorry, to the left. When it shifts to the right, the area that we can afford has gotten bigger. When it shifts to the left, it means the area we can afford gets smaller. So the income increasing and decreasing is also represented by the size or the area of the triangle that we're looking at as well, that represents our budget periods. So far, so good. Anybody had any questions they wanted to ask for clarification of anything that went before? Nope, everything else is okay so far. All right, so let's move along. So let's bring the two concepts now together, and this is going to give rise to something called the consumer equilibrium position or optimum position. Um, so when we bring the two concepts of a budget line and an indifference curve together, we can arrive at what we refer to as a consumer equilibrium point. And that will be the point where the budget line is tangential to the highest attainable indifference curve. In this case here, it'll be at this point T here. Note the point T in the diagram. The budget line is tangential or is tangent to the indifference curve I3. Now it means I can't get to I4 and I5, but I can get to the highest indifference point at T. Now, the notice that there are other places where the indifference curves is cutting across other budget lines. I see I1 and I2 at UV and R and S, but that's not the highest position, because remember, what is the function of the person is to get to the highest level of satisfaction possible, and the highest level of satisfaction represents is represented by the highest indifference curve that I can get to, and that will be that at I3 at point T. So that point T is our consumer equilibrium position. Now, what's happening at that point? So at the point T, the slope of the budget line, this slope here, is equal to the gradient of the indifference curve at that point there. Now, we have to go back now and remember that the slope of the budget line represents the ratio of prices, and the gradient of the indifference curve at that point is going to be equal to the marginal rate of substitution at that point. So it means, therefore, that at the equilibrium position, the ratio of prices is equal to the marginal rate of substitution. Now remember those two concepts about the slope of the budget line and the marginal rate of substitution. So a point of tangency is where a curved surface touches a flat surface. It's sort of like a ball touching on a flat plane or wall or the floor. It's not the entire ball that's going to touch, it's just going to be that little spot where they're touching each other. So far, so good. So we understand that that is what that becomes our position um, of consumer equilibrium. And at that point there, at consumer equilibrium or optimum point, all consumers' income is expended on the two goods X and Y. So we've used up all our income. And the slope of the budget line, Px over Py, that's the mathematical notation for it, is going to be equal to the slope of the indifference curve, which is the marginal rate of substitution is equal to the marginal utility of X over the marginal utility of Y. Therefore, the optimum consumption point or the consumer equilibrium point is where the ratio of prices Px over Py is equal to the ratio of or the marginal rate of substitution, mu of x over mu of y. Okay, so no, it's sounding a little confusing, but each one represents one thing. One is the ratio of prices, the other is the marginal rate of substitution. And once they're equal to each other at the point t, then the consumer is said to be in equilibrium. The consumer is at his highest point of is at his highest point on the is achieving the highest possible attainable indifference curve that they can get to, and they are expending all of their income on both items, and that's this point here at y at t, and that represents a combination of y1 and x1 quantities of goods x and y. So far so good. Everybody's following that?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay. So this is why we had to know what the characteristics of each of these lines were in the past. All right. Okay. So what happens when we have changes? So the first change that we're going to be looking at is when we change income lines. So let's say there has been shifts in income. So as we see, an increase in income is represented by parallel shifting shifts outwards of the budget line, assuming that no changes in prices of good X and Y. So we have in difference these budget lines shifting outwards, and the only way it will shift outwards is if income rises. So from B1 to B2 to B3 to B4, these are the budget lines. It's shifting outwards. Notice the shifts are parallel, meaning that prices have remained constant, and it allows us to move from one indifference curve to another. So we are able now to arrive at higher and higher levels of satisfaction because our incomes have risen. We're buying more of everything. And when we connect these points to each other, these points R, S, T, and U, when we connect them together, it's called an income consumption curve. And this line, the income consumption curve, represents the relationship between changes in income and consumption. And that income consumption curve is a new derivative. It shows the relationship between changes in changes in income and the amount of consumption. And this is logical. Once the goods are normal goods, once incomes rise, we are going to buy more of everything. Okay? And that's where we're talking about with a normal good. All right. So, any questions on this, or would you like me to graph this out for you so that you can see how it's derived?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, please.
Graphed out. All right. So, if we go here, I'll just make a new. All right. So we're gonna start first off by drawing an indifference curve. I'll make it gonna be a little rough here. So we start first off by, this is our good X, and this here is good Y. So we're going to start by saying, okay, so this is our first budget line. Let's call this AB. So I'm going to use some different notation. Hold on, let me see if I can find a ruler here. All right. And no. Okay. All right. So this is going to be another budget line there, and then let's see, this is all right. So let's leave it as 3 budget lines, right? So this is the budget line AB. Incomes change, we get to CD. I'm going to skip using E, right? And then we have another budget line here, which we'll call FG. All right. So each of these budget lines are parallel to each other, meaning that the prices of both goods X and Y has not changed. Okay, let's clean this up a little bit here. All right. Now that allows us to move to a higher indifference curve. In each case, we could move from one indifference curve, this one here, to this one here, to this one here. All right, so this is I1 to I2 to I3. Why? Because with greater levels of income, we can now move to higher levels of consumption. That makes sense? All right, so that means we are at this point here, this is one equilibrium point, to another one here, to another one here. So we have up to this, so we could call this now equilibrium point 1, E1. This would be equilibrium point 2, E2, and this would be equilibrium point 3. If we connect these to each other, I'm going to use a sort of dotted line, well, this red line here. I'm going to connect these points to each other like that. This gives rise to an income consumption line. All right. As I said before, this here is an income all right, and this shows us the relationship between changes in income and changes in consumption. And what we can see here is that these are normal goods, because as our income increased, we increased the consumption of both goods. You seeing that? Now, this relationship here, therefore, is for normal goods. All right? Forgot to put in a label here. This is the point O origin. So far, so good. This makes better sense now that we kind of deconstruct it a bit. Yes, everybody seeing this clearer?
Yes, sir.
Yeah? Okay, good. Let's go back to the presentation then and see where they've all right, so it's the same thing here. It's just that the lines are, you know, nice and neater and a little more thing. But they did 4 shifts as opposed to where we did in 3 shifts. All right, but it's the same process that we're looking at there. Now, another change that can happen is the effect of a change in price of one good. So if either X or Y changes in price, the budget line will pivot. Remember, we talked about that before. So remember, when prices change, the budget line will pivot inward or outward depending upon the nature of the change in price. So in this case here, we move from B1, budget line AB1 to AB2, correct? You're seeing that? AB1 here, AB1 here to AB2. So when we say AB1, we're talking about this line here to AB2, budget line 2. Now, what would have caused the budget line to shift, to pivot outwards like this?
There was an increase. There was an increase, and the price decreased for units of good for X.
The price decreased, you said, or increased?
Increased.
Increased.
No. Yeah, because it got some more bigger, so it decreased.
Right. So it meant that the price of good X fell, causing the budget line to pivot outwards from AB1 to AB2. Following it there now? So the budget line, so in the case of the reduction in price A, no change in price of good Y. So we're holding one price constant, shifting one price of the other, right? So it said that the price of good X fell. There was a reduction in price, causing the budget line to pivot outwards from AB1 to AB2, right? The old consumption, the old optimum position was at point J here. After the reduction in price of good X, a new optimum position um, was found at K. That's at this point here. Notice that it means that because we move from one budget line to the other, we can now access a new higher indifference curve. The line that connects these 2 points is known as a price consumption curve, which represents the relationship between changes in price and changes in consumption. All right, so I guess maybe we should construct this again, and that way you could see it, right? Yes?
Yes, sir.
Chicken nuggets. All right, so let's start again, and we're going to start by first drawing our whoops. We're going to start first by drawing our axes, and this here is our good X, and up here we have good Y, correct? All right, and we said, oh, this is our point of origin O here. All right, so we said we had a budget line to start with. Let's put this here now. So budget line, and let's call, I'm going to use a slightly different method. I'm going to call this budget line AB. And we said that the price of good X got cheaper. So because it got cheaper, we can now buy more of good X, but the same amount of good Y, because price of good Y didn't change. All right, that makes sense? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Right? So what we're going to do now is that we're going to allow for, oops, let me undo that. All right. We're going to allow the a little tricky here. All right. All right, so now I'm going to call this AC. So the budget line pivoted in this direction about A from AB to AC. Yes? Make it sense so far?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
When you're looking at me, or I should say looking at this as if it's some kind of Greek mythology. I just want to do something here to extend this. I also want to try and make this a little more interesting. So I'm gonna go back to point A here. Gonna make a bit of a mess here again. All right. So I'm gonna give it a. That looks disgusting. All right. So I'm gonna extend this out like that. So let's say we have another one here. This is whoops, not D, but point D. All right, so we have another pivot from AB to A, so from point AC to AD. All right, so what would have caused that is another change in the price of good X. So X got even more cheaper. All right, now what that means is that we can now move from this allows us to move from this indifference curve here to another indifference curve here to another indifference curve here. See that? So we went from I1 to I2 to I3. So far, so good. Well, I mean, let's just imagine that they are tangential at these points, just for the sake of. So we have 3 budget lines there. So now we're able to move to higher levels of of equilibrium points. So we have this point here, E1 to E2 to E3. That'll be this point here, and this point here. I'm going to connect these like that. And that gives us a new relationship, which we called, what's the name of this line, guys? What's this line
Which
called?
line, sir?
Isn't it this red line? This
Income
red.
consumption curve.
Nope, this is the price consumption curve. Right, and this price consumption curve gives us the relationship between changes in price and changes in consumption. Right? That makes sense? So that's what this line is here. So we understand how it happened. As we had the budget line pivoting outwards, we have a price consumption line that's showing us that as prices fall, consumption increases. Now this holds true if the good is normal. So this is, we'll start from point E1 to E2 to E3 up here, allowing us to access, to access higher and higher levels of satisfaction. Once the good is normal, what we would find happening is that as the price of the good falls, we will buy more. But you'll notice something else here. We're not only buying more of one good, we're buying more of both goods. Huh? Watch and see that. We have to look at this in more detail now. So this is the price consumption line. And this is going to be important for us because we're going to come back to this to be able to construct our budget line, our demand curve from this here. So far, so good. You all understand what happened here and how it happened. Yes?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right. You know, you guys can take screenshots of these things, right? If you wanted to. Anyway, I'm going to put a recording up so you can also do screenshotting there as well. All right. All right. All right. So let's go back to the presentation here. Pick it back up here. So they did a simpler version here by only doing one shift, and they connected 2 points, and it's the same price consumption curve, and that price consumption curve connects those 2 points, and it represents the relationship between changes in price and changes in consumption. All right, so far so good. So the income consumption curve is a line showing how a person's optimum level of consumption of 2 goods change as income changes, assuming the prices of the 2 goods remain constant. And the price consumption curve is a line showing how a person's optimum levels of consumption of two goods changes as the price of one of the two goods changes, assuming that income and the price of the other good remains constant. So again, you understand we are changing one thing at a time. In the first instance up here, we are changing the income and holding prices constant. Down here, we're changing one price and holding income and the other price constant. So we're only changing one thing at a time so that we could represent or observe or evaluate what's happening with the consumer as they make those changes. So far, so good? All right. So now we want to try to look at the income and substitution effect of a rise in the price of good X if X is a normal good. Now, this is important. Remember, I kept on using this phrase normal goods. And what is a normal good? Now, to be easy, to be simple with you guys, a normal good is a good that follows the law of demand. Now, I haven't met the law, I haven't brought up the law of demand with you yet. But if you've been doing your work and you've been doing your reading, you'd realize that there are basically two types of goods. There are normal goods and abnormal goods. How many of you all did some reading in that area? Because you have an assignment that talks about it. Individual assignment. Yes? Talking to the wind here. When we talk about abnormal goods don't follow the law of demand and supply, and their reaction changes based upon that law. So we have Giffen goods, inferior goods, and Veblen goods. Did you all come across that yet? Anybody? If you've been working on the assignments, you would have come across some of these things already. Now, I want us to observe something here. If we go back to the change in consumption, the price consumption, when we constructed the price consumption line, we noticed something happening, which is the price of good X changed, but as a result of good X, we also consumed more of good Y as well. Now, how is that possible? And that's because when prices change, a consumer experiences two impacts. They experience a change in their real income, and they also experience a substitution effect that takes place. So that's why what we're looking at here is the income and substitution effect of a price change. So I know this diagram looks really complicated because there's a lot of things happening here. So let's read through this first, and then we'll go back to the whiteboard and redo the thing here so that you'll be able to see piece by piece. So the income and substitution effect of a price change. In figure 4.16, the price of a normal good, X, has risen, and the budget line pivots from B1 to B2. So that's B1 here to B2. Now notice that the budget line has pivoted inwards, meaning that the price went up. So it went B1 into B2. The consumption point has moved from point F to point H. That's point F here to point to F to H here. Part of this shift in consumption is due to the substitution effect, and part is due to the income effect. So we initially started at F, and then we went to this point H here. So we're saying that the movement from here to here, right, is going to be is caused by an income effect and a substitution effect. And we want to distinguish between the two. So moving along here, the substitution effect, to separate these two effects, a new budget line is drawn parallel to B2, but tangential to the original indifference curve I1. Okay, so let's take this. It is going to be a new budget line, and this budget line is given the coding here 1B1A is parallel to B2. That's the new budget line. All right. but it is tangential to the original indifference curve that we came from, which was I1, this case here. All right. This is the line BI1 being parallel to B2. It represents the new price ratio. So that the slope is going to represent the new price ratio as seen in B2. Okay, but it's being put tangential to the first indifference curve that we were on. Being tangential to I1, which is here, I1 here, it enables the consumer to obtain the same level of utility as before. Because remember, they were on this indifference curve, so they want to stay here. All right. In other words, there's no loss in real income to the consumer. By focusing then on B1A, which represents no change in real income, we have excluded the income effect. So that by looking at this tangential point here, G, all right, we try to hold off the income effect, which represents no change. We therefore have excluded the income effect. The movement from point F to G is due purely to a change in the relative prices of X and Y, right? And the movement from QX1 to QX2 is the substitution effect. That's QX1 here to QX2 is what they call the substitution effect. Now, we'll have to explain why that happens. So continuing along, the income effect. In reality, the budget line has shifted to B2. That's this new budget line, the red one. And the consumer is forced to consume at lower indifference curve I2. Real income has fallen. Thus, the movement from QX2 to QX3 is the income effects. QX2 down here to QX3 is the income effect. In the case of a normal good, therefore, the income and substitution effect of a price change reinforces each other. They are both negative. They both involve a reduction in the quantities demanded as prices rise and vice versa. All right, so I know people are probably going looking at this diagram and the discussion that's going on. Yes, so we need to reconstruct it so that you can see it. Now, before we do that, yes, somebody has a question. Somebody has a question. Okay. Nope. All right. So what I wanted to point out to you guys is, from a logical point of view, what happens when prices go up is that it means we have to expend more money on buying a good that has become more expensive, which causes us to lose income, meaning that because prices are rising, it means that our income could purchase less of that good. So in essence, what's happening is that our real purchasing power is falling. That making sense to you guys? So far?
So,
So, okay. So what we want to do is we want to reflect that. Now, the problem that happens is that when prices fall, the reaction by consumers is to try to maintain their current level of satisfaction. Remember, when you get accustomed to a particular lifestyle, what you attempt to do is to try and maintain that lifestyle. That makes sense? Think about it from your own personal perspectives. Most of you are working, right? Some of you are not. But if well, let's put this in a more general thing. Now, when you're home relaxing, what do? Give me some options of what you all do when you're home relaxing. Just
So when you relax and you do nothing.
right. But what might you be doing nothing? Reading a book, watching TV,
watching
sleeping,
TikTok.
watching TikTok.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. Just finding out your business there, that's all. Um, But my point being is you're doing something that is putting you at ease, and what you're doing is you're finding yourself at an equilibrium position in how you're feeling about things, correct? So your sibling, a brother or sister, comes tearing into your bedroom, making a set of noise and bawling on the keys. What happens to your peace,
You get distracted.
right? What would you like to do?
Send them out the room.
And
So
beat
that
them.
beat them up. We're not we're not condoning violence here, please. That might work in your house, but it doesn't work in the wider society, right? Let's leave that by itself. But what is your objective in sending them out the room or dismissing them? Your objective is to get back to that position that you were in before, not so?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
You relax and recline. So when it's the same thing that happens when we consume goods and services. When you find yourself in an equilibrium position of using your resources, anytime it gets affected by some change, what your first attempt that you're going to do, which is a natural reaction by consumers, is to try to maintain the current level of satisfaction. That makes sense?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
And
sir.
you have to try and get back to where it was before. So you throw your sister out of the house and you pelt out of the bedroom, so that you could just get back to your peace of mind and watch your TikTok. Yes?
Yes, sir.
Right. And the problem with that is, suppose she came in with news that the internet was going to be disconnected. What would happen? What would happen to
You,
your TikTok? Your TikTok?
sorry, sir.
Huh?
You will go read a book?
Would you? But would it be the same level? Wouldn't you really want to go back on TikTok?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. But the problem is the tools are no longer available for you to get there. So you therefore have to go to a different level of equilibrium. And somebody talked about going and read a book. Now, it's not the same as being on TikTok or being on or YouTube or wherever you go
You
to.
can buy data.
Well, you can't because you don't have the income for it. Remember, nothing else changes, huh? You don't have income. You've already spent money on buying internet services for your household. What's the point of going and buy data when you have a Wi-Fi? What's the point? Or you're teaching the neighbor Wi-Fi. Or
Neighbor
whatever.
Wi-Fi, sir.
All right. You understand my point? My point about it is that you can't do anything about it at that point in time. Maybe if you had more time, you could go and do something like, buy your own data feed or whatnot. But the fact of the matter is that we're only changing one thing at a time. We're not changing your overall status. We're changing one thing. We're saying internet services are going to fall. If you can't therefore get back to where you were before, then you're going to go to some other level of satisfaction, but it was not going to be at the level that you preferred it to be. So you're going to do without for a period of time. That makes sense? You're following the analogy you're trying to make here, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
All
sir.
So what happens when prices rise? The first reaction by the household is to try and maintain the same level of satisfaction that they were experiencing before. Now, if you look at the diagram that's on the board here, the first move is to go from F to G. What do you see happening in F to G? F to G is saying, right? So F to G, what's happening is that they're giving up what the good is that is more expensive and buying more of the good that the price didn't change, correct? So that they could stay on this first level of satisfaction, I1. That makes sense? That's you trying to get back on online and get back to your sense of satisfaction. You're getting disturbed, yes, all right, but you want to get back onto that same level of satisfaction because remember, all points along this indifference curve are different too. All right, so maybe you had to go off of TikTok because of your sister's thing because whatever you was looking at it expired and you instead of going to TikTok you went to YouTube, right? Or something along those lines, whatever it is you'll look at. So now you're at point G. But the problem is, if you can't stay at G because data is now going to be taken off, then you have to go down to a worse off situation. So what they're saying here is that the first thing that happened was that you were normally consuming at point F, which was x1 quantity of x, and they're not showing you, but there's a particular level here of good y. So in order to compensate, you would substitute away from the now more expensive good x. That's where you're dropping off from x1 going backwards to x2, and you're going to go to point G where you're buying less of good x and you're trying to compensate with more of good y. But you would notice something, that the area representing your budget line is now all the way down in this region here. Okay, all right. So let me go to the diagram. I started to sketch it out for you here so that you can see what I'm talking about. All right, you all think you're following what I'm talking about here, right? Yes, no, maybe.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right, so we're gonna start mapping this thing out, and I'm gonna do it as neat as I can so that you can. All right, so this is my good X here. Oops. And this is my good Y. Okay, so we're gonna first start off by saying um, all right, so we're gonna start off by saying we're at a position here. All right, so this is my position, my budget line AB. All right, so my first situation is that I am at AB and I am at equilibrium, and I'm going to call this I3 at this point here. Let's call this E1. That's my first position. All right, so I'm at equilibrium, lying on my bed, enjoying myself, looking at my TikTok or watching whatever cable or streaming TV or whatever. This is my optimum position. All right. The price of good X rises. So we have to say here now the price of good X we reflect that price change by the budget line pivoting inwards. Yes? The budget line now pivots inwards, not so? Is that true or not?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Oh, and somebody's talking there like, oh God, I don't want to do this. All right, so the budget line is going to pivot inwards from AB to a new budget line AC here. Okay? Let's bring this down like that there. Right. That means that the price of good X is now more expensive, so we can only afford. Now, at this point here, let me just track this in. At point E, this is my original position here at point E. I was consuming X1 well, let me call this x3 quantity of x, all right? Now, obviously, the budget line has come in, and I can no longer consume at that budget line. So I have no choice, but I have to move backwards because now my budget doesn't extend from OAB. That triangle no longer exists. I'm now inside this triangle OAC. So immediately you can see is I can't afford anything outside of this triangle OAC, correct? You all seeing that? I can't afford anything outside this because now my budget constraint is this triangle OAC. You seeing that here? So I can't stay at E1. No matter how much I try, I can't stay here. That makes sense? So I have to go to somewhere else. I have to go somewhere new. I don't have a choice, do I? So I'm going to, you're following that piece so far, right?
Yes, sir.
Brittany, is that you by chance?
No, sir, that's not me. I'm still excited.
Who's singing? So, oh, woe is me. Who's that?
I think Karishma.
I don't know. I can't see who's speaking. All right, so it means now I'm going to have to go backwards to this new indifference curve here. So new budget line AC here. I'm going to look for a new indifference curve that I can actually get to, and that's going to be this one here. All right, and it's going to be a lower indifference curve. Let's call this I2. So I'm going to be here now at this new equilibrium point E, let's call this E2 here. Now, the problem that is going to face, you recognize that now I can only afford, let's call this X1 amount of goods. So you realize I've given up all of these goods because now I can't afford it. I have to stay at this position here now. All right. You'd also notice that as a result of that, you'd notice my Y consumption has also gone down too. Seeing that there's Y1. Where was I before? I was out here. I was up at this point. Whoops. I was consuming all the way out here at Y, let's call this Y3. So that was the combination of goods I was consuming at my first equilibrium point of E1, Y3, X3. Now I'm at a lower consumption point. So obviously I'm at E2 here. I am now consuming Y1, X1. So I had to give up all of this because the price of one good went up. Huh? Remember that. One good went up. Remember, we pivoted inwards in this direction. Now, what we're saying, or what the theory is telling us, the movement from E1 to E2 is called the effect of a price change. But that price change of E1 to E2 is actually made up of two effects. It's made up of a substitution attempt, or what is called the substitution effect. And we also know it's going to be made up by an income effect as well. Okay, so what we want to do to be able to differentiate between the substitution attempted and the income effect is to hold one of them constant. Now, the way in which we hold one of them constant is by doing something. So what was it we said we will do? We are going to take a budget line that is parallel to the new, parallel to the new AC budget line, but tangential to the first indifference curve. Because remember, when we did income effects, remember the income caused the budget lines to pivot like that. Remember, not pivot, but to shift parallel, because each one of these represented the same ratio of prices. So what we want to do is we want to take what is the new ratio of prices and put it back onto the first indifference curve we were on to see what's happening. Now, it's going to be a little tricky for me to do with this particular device. So let me just give me a chance here. All right, first off, let me change color so we can distinguish what's going on. So I'm looking for a budget line that is parallel to AC, but is going to be tangential. I have to freehand this. It's going to be tangential to the first indifference curve we were on. So that's going to be and I'm going to call this A prime, C prime. And my point of tangency is about here, so let's call that point E, let's call that ES for distinction purposes. So this point here, look at what I attempted to do at ES. What I attempted to do was to give up some of that expensive, let's call that XS here. I attempted to give up some of that expensive good X and now purchase more, let's call this YS here. All right. I now want to give up the expensive X quantity of goods, because remember what do I want to do? I want to try to stay on I3. Making sense? Remember, that's where you were back looking at your TikTok and all that kind of stuff, right? You're recalling that. So the effect, or what the purpose of this indifference, this budget line is here now, is because I am trying to hold back the income effect. This means my income didn't change yet. All that happened is I'm trying some substitution. So I move from E1 to ES. So the substitution effect is measured by the movement from E1 to, in my diagram, ES. All right, but the end result is my budget no longer allows me to stay outside the area OAC, this smaller triangle. I can't be anywhere but inside or along inside this area here. So I can't stay at ES. I have to move inward, and that causes me to move down to E2. So therefore, the movement from ES now to E2 is the effect of my fall in income. Seeing that there now, guys?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now I know it looks tricky, but what we're doing here is this budget line here, the dotted one, is imposed on the diagram. It is parallel to AC, but it is tangential to the first place we were at. The option here is that I'd like to try and stay in a position where I was at my previous level of satisfaction. Now there's an opposite way for us to look at this, and I'll show it to you in a quicker format here now. um, so that you can see it. And that is if prices went down. So if we, I'm just going to quick sketch this here for you. So if we start with, this is my good Y here, this is my good X, this is O. If we start with a situation where we were initially at this point here, let's call this budget line AB. That means I would have been at this indifference curve here, I1, and this is my equilibrium point, E1. All right. But instead of prices going up, prices went down. So what will happen if prices go down is my budget line pivots outwards. You'll remember that, right? So now I go to AC, we pivot outwards, which means now, as a result of my budget line pivoting outwards, I can get to a higher indifference curve, not so? So I get to I2. So I'm now at a higher level of satisfaction at E2. Now, the problem that's going to happen is that, let's suppose instead of your sister coming inside to say to you that the internet is going down, your sister comes to tell you and have ice cream outside to come and get some. Would that enhance your level of satisfaction, or would it lower your level of satisfaction? What's better than looking at TikTok and eating a little bit of ice cream with it?
So because you want to watch the TikTok, you do not want the ice cream.
No. I'm trying to say, wouldn't the ice cream add more satisfaction to you? Wouldn't it make the experience better of you relaxing?
Yes, sir.
Right. Or a piece of chocolate cake or something that you enjoy. So what I'm trying to say to you in this case here, instead of your sister bringing bad news for you, your sister is bringing news that will help to improve your enjoyment of things. So let's look at what's going on here. Remember, at E1, we're in a situation where we are consuming initially X1 quantity of goods. And then as a result of the price change, the price fall, we're now at X2, or let's call that X3. So the price change, or the price effect, is equal to the area E1 to E2, correct? Now, what we want to do is we want to see how much of this is made up of the substitution effect and how much is the income effect. All right, so that's what we want to look at here now. Now, what we have to do is we have to hold back the income effect. Now, the income effect meant that we came off of this particular indifference curve, correct? So our income held us to this I1. So what we want is we want an indifference curve that is parallel to AC, but tangential to the original indifference curve that we were on. So we're going to end up now with an a budget line that looks something like this, right? Well, not exactly like that, but something that looks along the lines like that. And we're going to call this A prime, C prime. And our this position here will be our E3 position. So this is the amount of substitution that we would have attempted to get back when our initial situation was disturbed from here to get to the percent. Notice what we're going to be doing here. We're going to attempt to buy, this is X2, but look at what happens with Y. Initially, what we did here is that we were at Y1, then we decided to give up some of Y to buy more of X. So we had Y, let me call this Y2 up here and call this Y1 here. So we decided to give up some of of y to get more of x, because that's what we normally do when we move along this indifference curve. But then when we did that, we end up with change. And that allows us now to move to increase both our consumption of x and the consumption of y. So that now we're able to get more of everything, because this situation is a better situation because the price went down. So the substitution effect is going to be measured by the movement from E1 to E3. That's this movement here along the indifference curve when we held back the income effect. And then when we released the income effect, we moved from E3 to E2, which then allows us to consume Y3 and X3 quantities, greater quantities of both goods. So in this case here, this is you with your TikTok and your ice cream and your chocolate cake. So you're you're yamming it up now because you're all the way out here. Over here, you just want to get half a bowl of thing and try and give up some of your TikTok to get some ice cream. You understand what I'm talking about? When you realize you could get chocolate cake, TikTok, and ice cream all together. That making sense? So that based upon the direction of the change, the income effect can be positive or negative. Now again, we're holding to the concept that it's a normal good. Now in this situation here, remember we were looking at it going in the reverse direction. The price of the good went in the reverse, so things got bad. But when things get bad, households attempt to stay at their original positions because a household does not like to give up its standard of living. It likes to improve its standard of living. But sometimes they have no choice. When prices change, it has the impact of lowering our purchasing power, and therefore we have to do it out. All right? Everybody's following this so far? That's it. That's what
Yes, sir.
Let me hear questions. All right, so that's what they were trying to show us here for the normal good. You have this green budget line being put in place here to hold back the effect of the income change, keeping us on the original indifference curve that we were at before, but representing the new ratio of prices that B2 is reflecting. That's why it's parallel to B2. You realize B1 shows the cheaper prices, B2 represents the higher prices. So therefore, B1A is going to be representative of that higher price ratio. So that's the substitution effect from F to G, and then from G to H would measure the income effect or the effect of the income change. So the income effect of a price change, that portion of a change in quantities demanded result from a change in your real income. The substitution effect of a price change, that portion of the change in quantities demanded that results from the change in the relative price of the goods. Real income, all right, income measured in terms of how much it can buy. If your money income rises by 10%, but prices rise by 8%, you can buy only 2% more goods than before. Your real income has risen by 2%. So remember, if money income goes up but prices rise, it erodes some of the thing. A normal good is a good whose demand increases as income increases. That's the normal reaction. All right. So far, so good. You're following that?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right. So this is the last element that we want to look at here with indifference curves analysis, and that is deriving the individual demand curve from the indifference curves analysis. So with expenditure and all other goods plotted on the vertical axis with income, taste, and the price of all other goods held constants, we can now derive the demand curve for the goods. So yeah, you're looking at a real complicated thing. So let's go through this first, and then we'll see if we can deconstruct it. All right. We illustrate changes of price of good X by pivoting the budget line on the point where it intersects the vertical axis It is then possible by drawing a price consumption line to show the amount of X demanded on each price. It is then a simple matter of transferring these price quantity relationships onto a demand curve below. All right, so what they did here is they have one budget line, B1, then they lower the price of good X to B2, B3, B4. So it means that prices change one, two, three times. That means the budget line pivoted outwards three times, four, well, once, two, three, and gives us four different price levels and four levels of demand that we had. Now, we are looking only at price X, good X. So they extended downwards at A, how much of X, quantity of X I'd buy, at B, how much X I'd buy, and we know the prices for each one going down. We transpose that information down to this graph here by vertical summation, by moving the values from here down to here. It's the same scale we're using on this axis here is used on this axis here. However, instead of plotting the quantities of good Y on this axis on the lower piece here, we put the prices down on this side here, starting with the first price, the highest price, which was the beginning of the exercise, P1, then P2, then P3, then P4. Now, we will actually do this, of course, on the other side. So at P1, the amount consumed was at this point here, Q1. So the point of intersection is called A. So it references the equilibrium point A above. P2 is reference off of Q2, quantity 2. So this point references B, the equilibrium point B. P3 references the C equilibrium point. That gives us this, that's at Q3. And point D obviously would follow the same thing. We join these together, and what we're able to generate here is we're able to now plot a graph that is going to show us the relationship between the price of the good and the quantities demanded of the good by one individual. You're seeing that vertical summation. So this diagram here is just a more elaborate price consumption curve that is utilized to generate or to extract a demand curve by moving the information downwards through vertical summation. All right. In the figure, each of the points A, B, C, and D on the demand curve in the lower part of the diagram corresponds to one of the 4 points on the price consumption curve. That's this point here, each of these here. Note that P2 is half of P1, P3 is 1/3 of P1, and P4 is 1/4 of P1. So everything's kind of calculated based upon the, so P2 is half of P1, P3 is 1/3 of P1, and P4 is 1/4. So you can see the proportions here that kind of shows the relative prices of it. But if we were using figures, we could actually map them in to the diagram, right? So that's the main thing. You all want? Do you want me to go through this one and map it out for you and show you the technique? Because at the end of the day, what is really important is understanding how we move this price consumption curve from here to here. Yes?
Yes, sir, you can do it. We made it.
Yes, sir.
All right, then. So let's go to new canvas. All right, so okay, so let's start first and foremost. Well, let's do it with a straight edge. Maybe a straight edge, but all right. Oh crap! I'm gonna have to do this a little different. What the neck? Too high. so I need to create a situation where I am right. So what I want is I want this here to be the amount of good X that I'm buying, and I want down here to measure the quantity of X, of good X. And remember we said here we're looking at price, the price of good X. This side is going to be good Y because that's the indifference skills analysis. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to sketch a couple of budget changes, right? So we start first off with AB here. And I'm not going to do 4, I'm just going to do 3. So then we have AC, and then we have another one here, AD. Now, that allows me to move from across 3 indifference curves. You know, seeing that there, right? So we're here first off at E1, then we are here at E2, and then we're here at E3. So E1 is occurred when price was at P1. E2 occurred when prices are at P2, and E3 would be when prices are at P3. Now P1 is the highest price, okay? So let's say P1 is the highest price, just to make sure we remember that. And other prices, these are going downwards. Now, that gives us a quantity that we want to shift downwards. So I need to find that point here. All right. So that point is what I want to transfer downwards to this axis. So this represents the quantity X1 of, this is X1 here, of the good that we purchased, right? From this equilibrium point here, we are demanding this quantity X2 of good X, and at this point here, transferring that information down here, this is X3. So this should actually read QX3 or QX2. So let me clean that up a little bit so that a little neater. All right, so this is Q3, Q2, and this is Q1. Now, I'm mapping in now the prices on the price axis because I don't need to do anything else here. So remember what they did here is that they connected these 3 lines with each other. Whoops. They connected these 3 lines to each other here like this. This was the, what is this, guys? What line is this? This is the price consumption curve, right? And that line is showing the relationship between prices and consumption. We've translated that information down to a different graph now, where now remember P1 is the highest price. So we have P1 here, we have P2, and then the lowest price was P3. So what we're doing now is we are going to we're going to cross-reference that information. So P1 is related to what quantities? X1 quantities. This was the lowest price here. It was our first indifference curve. So that is cross-referenced to this point here. That gives us our first position. P2 is cross-referenced to our second position, which is over here. And P3 is cross-referenced to the third quantities. So we end up now with 3 points that we can now map. We have point 1, point 2, and point 3. And we can connect these points to each other like so. Well, using a ruler with a straight line, and this would give us an individual demand curve for whoever this individual is. All right, and we'd label this DD. This is the individual all right, for whoever this individual is. Remember we were talking about this guy OLLIE, Ollie. So maybe this is Ollie's individual demand curve. But it's derived using the price consumption curve from one to the other. The technique that we're using here is something called vertical summation. All right, so we're transferring vertically, from one axis to the next. And we're switching over the vertical axis to represent different things, cross-referencing that information across the board. All right, you all follow this, guys? All right, so this might have been when prices was at 20. This might be when it was 10, and this might be when it was 5. All right, prices in dollars. That makes sense? So P1, P2, P3. So at $20, Q1 might have been, let's say this was 6 quantities of X. At $10, the person decided, okay, I can consume 12, and at $5 now they're going up to 20. So you'd see that the quantities being consumed is changing as a result. And what we see is the same downward sloping curve from left to right that was similar to the marginal utility downward sloping curve. You all remember that one? So the demand curve derived in the marginal utility theory, all right, is the same. There it is here. An individual demand curve from marginal utility theory. It is the same shape as the one that we see now coming up with the price consumption line from this curve. Making sense? Which we put out here. Everybody's seeing that here. So the technique is the same across the board. All right. Sorry for the scrappiness of those lines there. This kind of little thing there. Everybody follows this?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So that brings us to this is the end of that particular thing there. So I'm hoping you understand it so that you can attempt the quiz when you get a chance. So this is the unit quiz 5. All right, so you have 2 attempts on this quiz. So you'll see some questions that look like this. I have to get rid of this check, you're all getting away with this check thing here. All right, indifference curves or budget line diagrams conclude that Jimmy the indifference curve or budget line diagram concludes that Jimmy is definitely in equilibrium when he is something, consuming the combination of goods and services that is affordable and on the highest attainable indifference curve. Well, let's just say that might possibly be correct. In economics, utility measures what? Anybody who cares to answer this one? What was the answer? Can you all see it by chance?
No, sir.
The question is asking you, in economics, utility, select one, is a relative price of utility. Sorry?
So B is an index of satisfaction.
That's possibly correct. Yes. I'm not going to answer it. Marginal utility is equal to which of the following?
A.
The satisfaction obtained from consuming any number of units. Really? You remember what the formula for marginal
Sorry,
utility?
D, sir. D. Sorry.
All right. Let's hope you get that right next time. As more of one good is consumed, marginal utility does what? Does it fall? Does it increase? Does it remain the same? Is it negative and stays negative? So remember what we said, as we consume more and more of any item, our marginal utility falls. So it decreases, okay? The consumer's demand for tuna can be found from an individual indifference curve diagram by doing which of the following? Seeing what happens to consumption for tuna for different income levels, finding where the budget line is tangential to an indifference curve for one piece of tuna, allowing the price of tuna to change and observing the different best affordable levels of changing the indifference curve and seeing the changes in the quantity of tuna consumers. Changing consumers and seeing the changes in the quantity of tuna the consumer demands. Which one y'all think this one might be? This will be interesting. Because the indifference curves tends to be a little tricky. This is based on the last thing we just did. Right. So it should be C. Huh? And it is C. By allowing the price of tuna to change and observe the different best affordable levels. That's what we just did in that that thing here when we pivoted and then saw where each of the indifference curves gave us the consumer's reaction. All right, observing the best different affordable levels of tuna. And that told us how much they would demand for each one. So things for you to check. All right. The budget line is a boundary between what? Anybody wants to take a guess? Can you all see this or is it still too small?
It's too small.
Yeah, chicken. That's bigger there now. Have a look at that. Somebody give me an answer.
So B.
Yep, that will be correct. What about this one here? The quiz is not currently available. I'm gonna have to do this one. Which of the following is true about an indifference curve?
So is it A?
Any point on the curve represents an affordable combination of goods.
So C.
The curve is bowed away from the origin. The curve is negatively sloped.
B.
Positively sloped.
I don't know.
Right. So you know,
Say
you all know
C.
you need to review your stuff, right? Is it concave or convex to the origin? And to go back into the features of the you'll need to also add some readings into this too. For some reason I don't have this quiz open yet, so I'll open it tonight one time, so just in case you're looking at it. It should be this, I think. The curve is negatively sloped. Remember, it slopes downward from left to right. Okay. Just to be all right. Sushi costs $3 per piece, and Cynthia's total utility after eating one piece is 30. But total utility after eating two pieces is 51. So what is her marginal utility from the second piece? So you could go down now. What's the formula for calculating
A.
yes. What's the formula for calculating marginal utility? Or what is the marginal utility? It's the change in total utility when consumption rises by 1, not so? Change in total utility divided by the change in quantities consumed. And the change in quantity consumed will always be equal to 1. So remember, total went from 30 to 50, 51. So it'll be 51 minus 30 divided by the second piece that she ate is still 1. So this is where you get 21. Cool? All right. Utility is the
A.
yep, that's correct. So like guessing a little bit. Last question on this version of the quiz. If a goods price increases, the consumer's budget will what? Budget line will do what? If a goods price increases, a consumer's budget line will do what?
So would it be D?
Yes, it rotates or pivots inwards. I guess the word rotates kind of sets me up there, but it rotate and pivot are similar words. All right, it's just I guess the bank I'm using here. All right, so yes, it would be D because remember it pivots inwards closer to the origin, meaning that the increase in price means that the consumer's budget can no longer extend to the same area it was before. Okay, all right, I need to open this quiz for you guys. Of course, you're not going to fail this and only answer 2 questions. All right. Let me go back and edit this quiz. This quiz was open already, right? Let's see. Edit.
Yes, sir.
All right. So let me just try to make this all smaller so all the stuff will fit. Oh, wrong area. It's called to open.
So that's quiz 2.
Oh crap. Keep on clicking on the wrong things. Oh, I was setting this up to all right, let me look at it today. Right, I'm supposed to take off something, one of the choices you have with it. Because somebody keeps on telling me that it's right. So that should open it up now, right? All right, I'm gonna have to check and see what's causing that check thing to come on. All right. All right, so let me leave it that way from there. All right, guys. Any questions? Anything you all want to clarify before we call it quits? It's already past 9 o'clock.
No, sir.
All right, so I'm gonna should I stop the recording already?
Good grammar and spelling are important, but if you want to write
Sorry about that.